Hi all, I thought we could have a look at Game 7 of the classic 1972 match between Boris Spassky and Bobby Fischer. So in Game 7, Boris was playing white and played e4. We saw the Sicilian defence being played, in particular the Najdorf, and entering into now the poison pawn variation after e6 f4, the immediate queen b6 hitting b2. Okay, Boris reacts with queen d2, queen takes b2, and now retreats his knight, which protects the rook on a1 and reserves rook b1 as a potential threat. Black anticipates rook b1 and plays queen a3 immediately. Now we see bishop d3, and it looks like the e5 break is potentially quite dangerous here, especially if white castles. You can see that the e5 break will wrench open the f file, and also this diagonal is well placed on d3. Fischer plays bishop e7, and now white castles, and here black does not routinely castle. We'll look at this in the second pass. It's a very, very sharp opening position really. So the poison pawn variation is putting black potentially on the brink of defeat very quickly. And you might be surprised by this next move. It's just h6, basically asking this bishop to reposition itself. And if it does go to h4, like in the game, it is a bit loose there, and it's exploited. This loose piece is now exploited as well as the queen's location here with this next move, which Fischer played, knight takes e4. So it's a double attack on the queen and the bishop. Okay, and you might think, well, there's a slight weakness of the last move here. Okay, it's grabbing a center pawn, which is important. So knight takes e4, bishop takes h4, but the slight weakness of the last move is this d6 is a little bit more vulnerable without the bishop there on e7. And in this position, d6 is actually targeted with a very tactical move very soon. First, Boris though plays f5, and if black dared castle here, then f6 would look crushing. It appears crushing. We'll check in the second pass, but it looks as though black's kings had it if f6 is actually tolerated if black castled here. So Fischer took this pawn, and now we see a slight problem of this bishop trying to be exploited with Boris's next move, very dynamic move in this position, and the king still in the center. So Boris plays in this position the move bishop b5 check, which is a double attack on the king and also exposing a frontal attack on d6. You might think, is there any other alternatives for trying to exploit d6 in this position? I think we'll need to check out knight takes d6 check with the idea of bishop b5 as well, but it might not work because black might have king e7 and the bishop's actually eyeing e1 here. So this is an interesting alternative, bishop b5, which Boris played, trying to exploit the king in the center. So it's a hair-raising position to have with the black pieces. You know, white's rooks are connected. All of the pieces look quite aggressive. Obviously the bishop's offered itself to keep the king in the center. This is actually accepted, and we see knight takes d6 check. Okay. In this position, Fischer plays king f8. So he's offering the c8 bishop, not with check however, and he wants to try and start developing maybe with knight c6 soon. After knight takes c8, knight c6, you might think this position is really dangerous for black. But what are the concrete threats? Now, the queen is actually usefully guarding the diagonal, especially the d6 square. So the rook's attacking the knight. If the knight goes to b6, it looks fairly interesting, but then what about rook d8? We need to check that out in the second pass. So it looks as though there's two main alternatives. Queen d7 is also perhaps worth checking out as well. Okay, but in the game, knight d6 is chosen, and it does eye f7, which means maybe queen d5 is dangerous, rook f5 is dangerous. In this position, rook d8 puts immediate pressure now on that knight. But Boris's idea is not to keep the queens on. He doesn't mind getting the queens off, perhaps with some advantage. He plays in this position knight takes b5, so offering his queen for knight takes a3. Fischer doesn't want to go in for that position. He plays actually queen e7. Still with his rooks not connected, it looks quite dangerous potentially, but black has that asset of the dark square bishop. Technically, he's also a pawn up, of course. So we see the move queen f4, and now g6. So can Fischer connect his rooks now with king g7? White plays a4, and we see bishop g5, which gives black potential usage of e3 and with check on this diagonal. Queen c4, check, and now the bishop is supported with f4. And it looks as though this rook might be tied down tactically if black always has the possibilities now of f3, which could rupture white's king safety. Spassky treats this position akin to how you might treat a king's gambit. That f file, it would be nice to blast it open. He plays actually the move g3. Okay, Fischer reinforces that pawn, and now we see rook a e1. So at the moment everything's holding. The queen is holding this bishop, otherwise f7 might be a problem in some variations. But okay, in this position Fischer attacks white's queen, and now we do get an exchange of queens. Okay, and also black is now attacking c2. That is protected. King g7, and then we see knight a5, which gives white some options of either knight c4 or knight b7. b6 is played, protecting the b7 pawn. Knight c4, so immediately threatening to get a pawn back with knight takes e3. That's protected. And now we see knight going to d6. That knight has gone very aggressive. It's potentially threatening knight f5 or c4 first, and then knight f5 check, and then regaining the pawn. So this f5 is also a problem now. Bishop c5 gets out of the way in advance of that being a problem on e3. But now knight b7, forking bishop and rook. Rook c8, and then we see the move c4. The knight goes to e3, attacking the rook. Rook f3 is now played. So what is white now threatening? Well, if given a chance, white would play g takes, and then e3 is loose. What about this c4 pawn? In fact, there's an exchange of prisoners now, as the Nxd4 would say. c4 for f4. Knight takes c4, g takes f4. So black has lost that outpost on e3, but black has also undoubled the pawns in effect. g4. Okay, rook d3. So materially, black is currently still a pawn up, but white's pieces are very active here. White controls the d file because that knight's actually controlling d8 here. Rook d7 might seem useful. Okay, h5 is played, and this gives also some potential maybe for playing rook h6 as well as rook e8, some extra flexibility for the rook, as well as these pawns could be potentially dangerous at some point in the future. Now we see another undermining move though, trying to get at the black king potentially. h3. Knight a5 is now Fischer's response. If he can get rid of that knight, he can challenge the d file and try and come down to d1 potentially. Boris refuses that. Knight 7 to d6. But this now gives the rook a chance to come to c1 after bishop takes, knight takes, rook c1 check, king g2. Okay, now you might think there's a dangerous threat of knight f5 or maybe rook e7. It is getting a little bit dangerous for the black king. Knight c4 is played, hitting the knight. There's also another check available to the knight which is used, knight e8 check. Okay, king goes forward now, king g6, and now it's as if, okay, there's interest in trying to weave some sort of mating net around Fischer's king. h4 is played, double guarding the g5 square. f6 from Fischer. Rook e6. Now we see rook c2 check. The king goes back, and in this position Fischer offers the f6 pawn with king f5, but is it too dangerous to take that with the rook? We'll check in the second pass. Boris actually plays knight g7 check, offering f4. Is he trying to weave a mating net? King takes f4, check, king g3, but is the white king now, which is being visited by the black king, going into trouble with rook c1 now, being dangerous? Spassky plays knight f5 check. After king f3, black is not now threatening mate, so Boris plays rook e4, hitting the knight on c4 as well as threatening potentially rook f4 and then maybe rook f2, but the knight is loose here, is the immediate thing as well. Rook c1 check is played here. King h2, not too many choices. Rook c2 check, and we have a perpetual check situation. So after king g1, they actually agreed a draw here. Let's check in detail with an edge in this game. It's a very complex tactical game. Did anyone miss any chances? Okay. In this final position, well, it's clearly a draw by Perpetual, but one thing to investigate in this position is g3 any good? White could just take on g3, and then that's really the end of it. If check here, now king h3 is very good. Not king g1, then knight e5 black would be doing brilliantly, but actually the move king h3 gives white the advantage. So for example, knight e5 check, check on f1, check, check wins the rook. So there's too many checks for the black king, so that g3 is no good really. Okay, so Fischer wise to take the perpetual. Let's go back in detail. So razor sharp poison pawn position. Knight b3, queen a3, bishop d3, bishop e7. So we saw castle here, and the move h6, which the engine is not actually mentioning in this position, h6. But these are the sort of lines Fischer would have analysed extensively in advance. Bishop h4. It seems White's got another option of bishop f6 and e5. That's another aggressive option. But bishop h4, treating it as another pawn sacrifice to try and expose d6 here, luring the bishop out basically, not minding. Knight takes e4. Knight takes e4, bishop takes h4. So this tactic to exploit d6 is interesting. The engine actually favours the material of black here at a certain depth. But okay, with bishop b5 given immediately, not f5. So f5 is actually now liked by the engine a lot. You see that evaluation jump to not being so bad after f5. If black castled here, let's really check this out. I think black would be smashed with f6 intuitively. But the engine seems to think there's some resource here for black. Queen b2, that does protect g7 indirectly. Queen b2, it just came from b2. It's not like a very human-like defense, but let's go with it. g3, white could still be better here. Rook takes f6, smashing up black's king side, and now it's advantage to white. If black did routinely just recapture there, queen h6 is crushing. There's no defense around black's king. Oh dear. So no, that's not the sort of thing to allow f6. So e takes f5, I think it's virtually forced. And we see this move bishop b5 check. The other option, let's just check this out of interest. Knight takes d6, queen takes. I guess this does not work to try and win the queen. King e7. In this position, I mentioned rook a e1 check. Black can take on e1. And here, just play bishop e6. There's actually no problem at all with the king protecting the queen. Okay, so in the game we saw bishop b5 check, and then knight takes d6 check. King f8 looks like the strongest move. Keep the king away from danger as much as possible. Knight takes c8, knight c6. So at the moment, again, the engine favours black slightly materially, I think, on material grounds. Knight d6 was played, which apparently is not maybe the best move at a certain depth. Knight d6. Queen f4 is also interesting, apparently. If queen f4 hits the bishop, let's go with g6. Queen takes, rook takes, queen f6. Still black is okay. And you might ask, well, after queen f4 is the other options. If bishop g5, then just queen takes f5 is on f7. This is quite dangerous for the black king. So that's why g6 is a good idea here, just to protect f5 and stop this f-file. Okay, so in the game we see the move knight d6, and it looks as though the engine really likes Fischer's position here after rook d8. So knight takes b5 is given as like the best move, which Spassky chose. And now queen e7 the best move for black. If black did take on d2, so knight takes a3, and it seems white's equalised somewhat to just be just over a pawn only for black, but still I think maybe these double pawns have been counted maybe too strongly. But let's see. In this position, let's go with rook d5, rook fd1, taking, okay. Okay, so here, king e7. So where would white's chances lie? Technically a pawn down, but it's only double pawns here. So let's say knight b5. c3. Okay, maybe it's just not so convincing with the double pawns, but the engine does like black still here. So let's go back anyway. Queen e7 was chosen, which engine actually likes keeping the queens on. Queen f4, and also protecting, of course, h4. So now queen f4 is not a double attack. g6 can be just protecting f5. Okay, a4, and we see bishop g5, queen c4, check. Now let's move f4, g3, trying to undermine that f file, g5, rook ae1. Okay, queen b4. That might be a technical mistake here. If you look at the evaluation, black was doing very nicely here. Perhaps with rook g8, being prepared to answer this and use this g file would be dangerous, especially if a queen could manage to get to e4 later. Maybe this is another interesting way of playing the position, rook g8. But Fischer chose queen b4, inviting the exchange of queens here. And he seems to have lost some of the oomph of the position with queen b4. Okay, white does take here and take time to defend the c2 pawn. And after king g7, knight a5, b6, knight c4, these knights are improving a little. Knight d5, knight cd6, bishop c5, knight b7 attacking rook and bishop, c4, given us a nice move by the engine, knight e3, not minding knight e3, just to play rook f3 here. So black's starting to get a bit loose here with his pieces. If the knight takes now and g takes, it's threatened, and he's offering, of course, c4 for f4, so dissolving black's double pawns here. But black's king safety maybe is a bit lessened now, and in fact the evaluation here is almost, you see that creeping up for white after undoubling black's pawns. So the evaluation creeping up slightly. So rook b3, there's some compensation here, and in this position it looks as though the engine actually kind of prefers knight c5 to what was played. So knight c5, knight takes c5, rook d7 does offer potentially, well, pressure on f7. So something like this, but still, okay, black's okay, it's holding on there. So let's go back. In the game, h3 was played. Knight a5, knight 7 to d6. Black took now, which maybe is a slight inaccuracy. It seems as though black's lost his earlier, more significant advantage here. But okay, the knight comes to the centre with knight c4. Check on e8. Now let's move h4. Okay, in this position maybe it's the case that f5 is actually a threat. If we give black a null move just to see what the threat is, let's say black plays rook a1 just to give a pass. Is it f5 or something else? Rook d5 is also mentioned. Well, that's a threat for rook g5. Okay. Okay, so move h4, f6 is played. Rook e6 targeting f6. Check. Now let's move king f5. So white plays check here. And check. And another check. Okay, rook e4. Check, and now we reach this perpetual situation. Okay, an intensely complicated Sicilian defence game, an exciting fighting draw, I think worthy of attention, and in one of the sharpest possible variations of the Sicilian defence, the poison pawn variation. Fischer not afraid of these types of positions. And okay, I hope you enjoyed it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.